The Texas sun was setting low over the sprawling acres of Bennett Ranch, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. From the porch of the main house, Lila Bennett watched as the cattle grazed lazily in the distance, a sight that should have brought her comfort. But today, it only filled her with a deep, hollow sadness. It had been just 3 weeks since her mother, Helen Bennett, passed away after a quiet battle with cancer. Now, the ranch, the home and business Helen had spent her entire life building, felt heavy with silence. For Lila, a 32-year-old veterinarian, this ranch wasn't just land. It was her childhood, her future, and a symbol of her mother's strength. Helen had turned a modest cattle ranch into a thriving cattle breeding empire, well known across Texas. Together, mother and daughter had dreamed of running it side by side. But those dreams died with Helen. Now Gregory, Lila's stepfather, was threatening to take it all away. Gregory had married Helen 6 years ago, swooping in like a charming savior when Helen was still grieving the loss of her first husband, Lila's father. To outsiders, Gregory was friendly and smooth-talking, a former oil salesman who appeared to dote on Helen. But Lila had never trusted him. There was something in the way he looked at the ranch, as if it were just another deal to close. Lila had tried to push her doubts aside for her mother's sake, but now those doubts were her harsh reality. Since Helen's funeral, Gregory had wasted no time. He started making calls to lawyers, business partners, and ranch employees, claiming he was now the rightful owner. And this morning Lila had received a sharp call from him, ordering her to leave the house within a week. As she stood alone in the study, her mother's safe haven filled with old books, awards, and family photos, Lila clenched her fists. Her heart was broken, but her will was unshaken. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the quiet room, reminding her to stay strong. One thing was clear to Lila now. She wouldn't let Gregory steal what her mother had built, and what was rightfully hers. Not without a fight. Lila stared at her phone, her hands still shaking from Gregory's call. "You've got until Friday to get out," he had said coldly, his voice sharp as a knife. "This place belongs to me now. You're nothing but a guest." A guest? The thought made Lila's stomach churn. She had grown up here. This land, this house, and the business were as much a part of her as her own blood. Gregory's words replayed in her mind, but she refused to let them break her. She took a deep breath and looked around her mother's study, searching for something, anything that might help. That's when she saw it. An envelope tucked between old ledgers on Helen's desk, marked clearly in her mother's delicate handwriting, "For Lila, when the time comes." With trembling fingers, Lila tore it open. Inside was a letter and a flash drive. "My darling Lila," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means Gregory is doing exactly what I feared. But don't be afraid. I've made sure he can't take away what's meant for you." Lila swallowed hard as she read on. Helen had thought of everything. She had worked closely with Charles Whitman, their family lawyer and one of Helen's oldest friends, to secure the ranch, business, and all assets under Lila's name. Gregory, Helen wrote, would only receive what was outlined in their prenuptial agreement, a small financial settlement, nothing more. But Helen had also gone further, anticipating that Gregory might try to fight it. The flash drive contained video recordings of Helen herself, sitting in this very room, explaining her wishes in detail. She made it clear that Lila was her chosen heir, and that Gregory had no right to the ranch or business. Tears blurred Lila's vision as she realized how hard her mother had fought to protect her, even in her final days. But her heartache quickly turned to anger when her phone buzzed again. A message from Mike, the ranch foreman, saying Gregory had called a staff meeting and told the employees he was now in charge. Some of the workers were confused and upset, loyal to Lila but unsure of what was happening. Gregory was already moving to take control, even contacting her mother's business partners and trying to assert himself as the new head of operations. To make matters worse, rumors were swirling in town. Gregory was telling anyone who would listen that Lila was manipulating her sick mother's mind before her death, calling her greedy and unfit to run the ranch. Lila felt her pulse quicken. She had to act fast. If she didn't, Gregory might do irreparable damage. Without hesitation, she called Charles Whitman. "Charles, it's happening," she said, her voice low but steady. "Gregory's trying to take everything." "I was expecting this," Charles said calmly. "But don't worry, Lila, your mother was smart. Everything is locked down tight. Let's meet tomorrow. I'll show you the evidence." As Lila hung up, she exhaled deeply. The battle was coming, and she was ready to fight for her mother's legacy and her own future. The next morning, Lila sat across from Charles Whitman in his downtown Austin office. A heavy folder spread out between them. Stacks of documents, copies of Helen's will and legal agreements covered the polished wooden table. Charles leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as he pointed to a thick sheaf of papers. "Your mother was thorough, Lila," he said gently. "She knew Gregory would try something like this. Everything is protected. The ranch, the cattle business, even the family home. It's all legally in your name." Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For weeks, she had feared that Gregory might find a loophole, but hearing Charles confirm her mother's careful planning gave her a surge of relief. Still, the fight was far from over. "Gregory is already telling people he's taking over," she murmured. "He's got some of the staff confused, and he's calling the bank, trying to access the accounts." Charles nodded grimly. "We'll put a stop to that," he assured her. "By law, he can't touch anything, and when we go to court, we'll show everything, especially these." He tapped a flash drive sitting on the table, the one Helen had left behind. "Your mother didn't just sign papers," Charles added. "She made video statements, several of them, clearly explaining her decisions. There's no way Gregory can argue she wasn't of sound mind." Lila's chest tightened as she thought of her mother sitting alone in that study, knowing her time was running out, still fighting to protect her daughter. "She was always 3 steps ahead," Lila whispered, her throat thick with emotion. "She was," Charles agreed softly. He reached into the folder and pulled out another document, Helen's prenuptial agreement with Gregory. "This was one of her smartest moves," he said. "Gregory agreed to it when they married. It limits him to a small settlement, nowhere near the ranch or business." Lila studied the paper, her fingers brushing over her mother's signature. "So what happens now?" she asked. Charles sat back. "Now, we prepare to face him in court," he said firmly. "And with what your mother left us, we're going to win, Lila. You just need to hold strong." Lila nodded, feeling a spark of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her mother's legacy. And she wasn't going to let Gregory take that away. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Lila Bennett stood outside the courthouse, her hands clenched tightly around a folder of documents. Beside her, Charles Whitman offered a steady, reassuring presence. But even his calm couldn't completely erase the knot in Lila's stomach. Today wasn't just about the ranch. It was about defending her mother's wishes, her own future, and exposing Gregory for who he truly was. As they entered the courtroom, Lila spotted Gregory, seated confidently on the opposite side, dressed in a sharp black suit, his usual smirk plastered on his face. Next to him sat his lawyer, a sharp-owned man, flipping through papers, and, to Lila's surprise, Chloe, Gregory's adult daughter. Chloe avoided Lila's gaze, but her presence was a mystery. Was she here to support her father, or was there something else? When the Judge Ramirez, entered and called the session to order, the room fell silent. Gregory's lawyer was the first to speak, painting Gregory as a grieving widower, wronged and cast aside by a heartless stepdaughter. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my client was married to Mrs. Helen Bennett for 6 years. He supported her through her illness and now finds himself left with nothing, a situation he believes was caused by undue influence exerted on Helen by her daughter, Lila." Lila's jaw tightened as the lawyer continued, claiming that Helen had not been of sound mind when she changed her will, and that Lila had manipulated her mother during her final days. Mrs. Bennett's declining health surely impaired her judgment, and it is only fair that her husband, who stood by her side, inherits the estate they built together, the lawyer concluded, casting a pointed glance at Lila. Charles stood calmly when it was his turn to speak. "Your Honor, what Mr. Gregory fails to mention is that Mrs. Bennett took great care in preparing her estate, knowing full well how her husband might behave," Charles said, his voice clear and firm. He then presented the will, the prenup, and finally, the flash drive containing Helen's video testimony. As the screen flickered to life, the courtroom watched as Helen Bennett appeared, seated at her desk, her voice strong though her face showed the toll of her illness. "If you're watching this, it means Gregory is trying to take what doesn't belong to him," Helen said firmly. "I was of sound mind when I made these decisions. I want my daughter Lila to inherit the ranch, the business, and the home we built together. Gregory has his settlement, that's all." A ripple went through the courtroom as Helen's calm, decisive words left little room for doubt. Lila glanced over at Gregory, whose smirk was quickly fading. But Charles wasn't done. "Your Honor, in addition to Mrs. Bennett's video statements, we have medical evaluations from her doctors confirming she was of clear and sound mind when these documents were signed." He handed the judge a thick file of medical reports, showing that Helen had been fully capable of making legal decisions. Then Charles revealed the final blow: security footage from Helen's office. The video showed Gregory snooping through Helen's private files late at night, looking through drawers and taking photos of documents with his phone. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Judge Ramirez leaned forward, his face stern. "Mr. Gregory," he said sharply, "do you have an explanation for this?" Gregory's face turned red, and before his lawyer could stop him, he shot to his feet. "She promised me everything," Gregory burst out. "She said she'd take care of me, and then that little brat turned her against me." "Mr. Gregory, sit down," the judge barked, but Gregory continued, his temper fully exposed for all to see. At that moment, Chloe stood up, her voice quiet but clear. "Your Honor, if I may," she said hesitantly, "I need to say something." The judge nodded. Chloe took a deep breath. I love my dad, but everything Lila is saying is true," she confessed, glancing nervously at Gregory. "I know he was pressuring Helen for months, and I know about the money he tried to move around. I'm sorry." The courtroom was stunned into silence. Lila's eyes filled with tears, not out of sadness, but relief. Judge Ramirez looked gravely at Gregory. "Based on the overwhelming evidence, I find that Mrs. Bennett's will is valid, and I rule in favor of Lila Bennett," he declared. "Furthermore, this court will open a formal investigation into Mr. Gregory's financial conduct." Gregory slumped back into his chair, pale and defeated. Charles smiled slightly, leaning toward Lila. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. And as Lila sat there, listening to the judge's final words, she knew her fight had been worth it. Her mother's legacy was saved, and Gregory's lies had finally been exposed. The courthouse steps felt different as Lila Bennett walked out into the cool Texas air. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest felt lighter, though her heart still ached from all she had been through. Gregory was finished. His attempt to steal her mother's legacy had been crushed, and now he would have to face a deeper investigation into the money he tried to sneak out of the business. Still, as Lila looked back at the courthouse, she couldn't shake the bittersweet feeling in her chest. Her mother should have been here to see it. "She would have been proud of you," Charles said gently as he stepped up beside her. Lila nodded, blinking away tears. "She always said to stand my ground. I just didn't think I'd have to do it like this," she murmured. Charles gave her a soft smile. "You honored her, Lila. You fought for what was right. And now the ranch is safe, in the hands she wanted." As they spoke, Chloe approached slowly, looking unsure. Her usual sharp confidence was gone, replaced by something softer, almost apologetic. "Lila, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," Chloe said, glancing away. "I knew what my dad was doing, but I didn't have the courage to stop him. I should have said something sooner." Lila paused, studying Chloe's face. She could see the struggle behind her words, and while part of her wanted to be angry, another part felt a sense of quiet understanding. "Thank you for telling the truth," Lila finally said. "That couldn't have been easy." Chloe looked relieved but still ashamed. "If there's anything I can do to help fix this, let me know." Lila gave a small nod. "Maybe there will be." As Chloe walked away, Lila turned her eyes toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. The ranch was still hers. Her mother's dream was safe. And though there was still work to do, Lila knew she had already won the most important battle, honoring her mother and protecting her legacy. Weeks had passed since the court ruling, and though Lila Bennett was still adjusting to her new role, the ranch finally felt like home again. Gone were the days of walking through her mother's house with tension hanging in the air. Gregory was out of their lives, and with the investigation into his financial schemes underway, Lila knew he would never be able to threaten what her mother had built ever again. But even with the victory behind her, Lila realized that this was only the beginning of her true journey, carrying on her mother's legacy and shaping the future of the ranch. The first thing Lila did was gather the ranch staff for a meeting in the big barn, where her mother had often spoken to them about business and family alike. As she stood before them, Lila took a deep breath. "I want to thank all of you for standing by this ranch through everything," she said, her voice steady. "My mother trusted this place to me, and I plan to honor that trust. For her, for all of you, and for the future of this land." There was a murmur of agreement, and when Mike, the foreman, gave her a small nod of approval, Lila felt a surge of confidence. After that day, she threw herself into running the business, reviewing cattle lines, checking contracts, and updating operations, all while keeping the heart of the ranch alive, just as her mother had done. But Lila also wanted to do more. Her mother had always believed in helping others rise, and Lila decided to create a scholarship fund in Helen Bennett's name, dedicated to supporting young women in agriculture and veterinary medicine. "If my mom could build this from nothing, there's no reason other girls shouldn't have the same chance," Lila told Charles when she proposed the idea. Charles smiled, clearly proud of how far Lila had come. "Should love that, Lila. It's exactly the kind of thing she would have done." In quieter moments, Lila would walk through her mother's study, now hers, running her fingers over the familiar wood of the desk, or pausing to look at the photos of her and Helen at various ranch events. She left most of the room untouched, keeping her mother's presence alive, but she also began adding her own touches, new plans, fresh ideas, and updated systems to bring the ranch into the future. One afternoon, as she sat reviewing a stack of paperwork, Chloe stopped by. "I wanted to say again how sorry I am," Chloe said softly, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Lila looked up, giving her a gentle nod. "I know," she replied, "and I haven't forgotten what you did to help." Chloe hesitated, then offered a small smile. "If you ever want help with the ranch, or the scholarship fund, I'd love to be part of it." Lila considered it for a moment, then smiled back. "Maybe we can figure something out." As Chloe left, Lila turned her gaze out the window, watching the sun set over the pastures. The same land her mother had fought so hard for. Now it was hers to protect, to grow, and to pass on. For the first time since Helen's death, Lila felt at peace, knowing that her mother's dream lived on, and so did her own strength to carry it forward. The story of Lila Bennett teaches a powerful lesson about standing up for what is right, even in the face of betrayal and loss. Through Lila's journey to protect her mother's legacy, we see the importance of courage, preparation, and integrity when faced with manipulation and greed. Helen's foresight in securing her estate and documenting her wishes reminds us that planning ahead and protecting our loved ones through careful action is essential, especially when others may have selfish intentions. Lila's decision to fight back, rather than give in to Gregory's threats, shows that standing firm in the truth can lead to justice, even when the battle feels overwhelming. The story also highlights how family is not always defined by blood, but by loyalty, love, and respect. While Gregory tried to tear everything apart, Lila honored her bond with her mother, proving that love and legacy can be preserved through strength and resilience. Ultimately, Lila learns that true victory is not just about winning in court, but about carrying forward the values her mother lived by: kindness, generosity, and perseverance, and in doing so, she finds her own strength and purpose.